Hi guys, it's me Kai and welcome back to my channel. You know, I love me a good wig. I'm sure a lot of you know that about me. I own dozens of them, but I've never owned a human hair wig. I've only ever worn synthetic. That is until I was contacted by this company called Beauty Forever. They asked me if I wanted to make a video making a wig with some of their bundles, and I was definitely reluctant at first because I've only really ever styled wigs, never had to make them, but I figured it would be a fun challenge to try out for you guys. This is how it turned out, and I absolutely love it. It was definitely a lot of work, so I'm gonna make this video in two parts. This first one is going to be just how I made the wig and sewed the hair into the wig cap, and then my next video is going to be how I styled it and customized it. They sent me 4 bundles and a lace closure in a box that looks like this. It's 100% virgin Brazilian hair, which basically just means it was taken from Brazilian virgins. And the retail price on this was actually surprisingly cheap, not nearly as expensive as most of the human hair wigs on the market, but that's because you kind of have to do all the work yourself. It wasn't even really that hard, it kind of just took a lot of time. It was definitely worth it though because I love the finished result. So if you want to see how I made this wig, be sure to subscribe and just keep on watching. Alright, shout out again to Beauty Forever for sponsoring this video. They sent over 4 bundles of hair plus 1 lace closure, so that's what I'm going to be working with. I also went out and bought this spandex dome cap from the beauty supply store. This is going to be our base. It's nice and stretchy, which is going to be perfect for us. And you'll also want to get yourself some dark thread and a curved needle. It's possible to do with a normal straight needle, but this is just easier. Start by putting your dome cap over a wig head. And here I should have used my bigger brown one that I always use. I'll explain why later, but here I'm just using the styrofoam one for the beginning, and I'm sewing the lace closure onto this. Try to find the center front of your cap and align the hairline, not the lace, with the edge of the cap and pin it in place. And then we're going to hand sew all around the edges of it, not the lace part, but the U shape all around it. When I got this lace closure, I was surprised how small it was, because, I don't know, I'm used to my lace fronts going from ear to ear, but I guess this is like the cheaper version of that. I mean, the upside here is you don't have to glue down sideburns, and if you let your hair fall down the sides, there's less chances to be clogged, and you just have to blend like these 3 inches of lace as opposed to an entire hairline. But that's all for the next video. Right now, we just want to secure this onto the cap, and I'm actually sewing the 2 sides of it first, and then finally the back of it last. That way there's less chance of it bunching up or being tilted to one side, and I can just ensure it's as even and symmetrical as possible. And it should look like this. Now we're going to start sewing these bundles on, starting from the bottom where the nape of the neck would be, and you're going to work your way up in rows. Partway through this, I tried it on and found it was way too small, and I'll explain what I was doing wrong and why I had to start over again on my bigger brown wig block. After doing almost 2 bundles of hair, you can see that the inside of the cap is all bunched up, which really took away a lot of the stretch, and I got a big man head, so I couldn't put the wig on anymore at this point. So I had to cut all of those threads out to let the bundles free again and start over. And what I found out is that if you're going to use a stretch wig cap, you have to make sure the cap is fully stretched out when you're sewing the hair in, or at least stretched out enough so that it can fit over your head. And this brown wig block is more of an average head size because it's made for wig making, whereas the small styrofoam block is more like a display object. It's not big enough, at least for my head. The reason I wasn't using the bigger one from the start is because I was afraid of accidentally sewing the cap onto the block because it's made of a very dense cork material, whereas if I sewed it into the styrofoam, I could have easily ripped it out. In the end, this ended up not being a problem for me since I was just really careful when sewing, but moral of the story is to put your stretch cap on a big enough head. If you don't have a big brown wig block, you could try to use the styrofoam, but maybe just add some padding to make it bigger and really pull that wig cap down, pin it in place, make sure it's stretched out so you can retain the elasticity of it. And the other way to make sure this doesn't happen is when you pierce the needles into the cap, pick up as little cap as possible. The needle does not need to be digging into the cap in this big U-shaped scoop. The more you do that, the more the needle takes control of the cap, and you don't want to do that. Just very slightly go in and out at like the same spot, and it should be enough to grip the hair weft onto the cap. Anyway, let's go back to the sewing. I'm starting at the bottom again, and you want to use your longest bundles at the bottom just so the hair looks a little bit more layered. I happen to have a 22 inch, a 20, an 18, and a 16 inch, so I went from longest to shortest going upwards, and we're sewing this in rows moving towards that lace closure. Here's the drawing I did to help you get the idea. So if this thing here is the lace closure, we're starting at the very back of the head, sewing row by row. And I measure how much hair will fit in a row, and I cut it off there. If I'm left with a little extra piece, I'll just attach it somewhere else. You can also double up and sew in 2 lines of hair at once to speed up the process. Some people I've seen will also just fold the hair over and do like a zigzag like this so they don't have to cut the hair off at any point. Personally, I found that once I got the hang of this, I didn't like changing the directions. I'm kind of like a typewriter. I only like going in one direction and then starting over at the other end. So I couldn't do this zigzag method, but you can try it out for yourself when you do this. Now, depending on how much hair you have to work with, you'll be spacing out the lines accordingly. What I see in a lot of wig making videos is people say to use less hair on the top so that the top of the head sits more flat and sleek and less wiggy. I mean, I'm a wiggy person. I don't really mind if it looks not natural at the top. This was my first time making a wig, so it was a learning experience. As for the stitch, basically you're going to sew the weft into the cap in the beginning and at the end of every row, but throughout the middle of it, the needle doesn't need to pierce through the actual weft of hair. You can kind of just go underneath the hair. So I thread the needle through the hair and into the cap, and then through the loop of the thread. It's called a blanket stitch. You should look it up. It's hard to explain without seeing it, but you'll see the needle goes through the hair, in the cap, and out the cap. And like I said, be careful not to pick up too much cap or else we take away that stretch. But before pulling the needle to tighten it, I make sure it goes through the loop. I'll have the loop open using my other finger so that the needle just goes through it automatically. And you should have something that looks a little like this. I don't know, I saw it in another video and I thought it was a good idea and it worked pretty well for what I did. It's hard to do when you have too much thread or too little. I was rethreading my needle over and over again, but the good thing about these big curved needles is that they have a bigger hole that's easier to thread. Just like yours truly. When threading them with a string, I used about the length of my one arm so that I never had to pull any farther than what I could do using one hand. If I get to the end of the weft and there's still some thread left, what I do is I wrap a few loops around the needle and then push it down with my finger while pulling the needle. This creates a little knot, keeping it in place at the base. If you don't have enough thread for that, just use what you have to tie a knot with your fingers the good old-fashioned way. When I was younger, my mom would always fix and sew up my clothes with a hand and needle, so I picked up a very basic understanding of stitches from eventually learning to do that myself. I never know how much experience you guys have though, so sometimes, I don't know, I fear I'm explaining too much or too little. I don't know. Anyways, something else that helped me was to pin the hair into the wig using some pins, just so I know what I'm doing. I left about 1 centimeter in between each row of hair, and I also didn't go from edge to edge. Like, I left a little bit of space where the elastic band was, because I didn't want to take the stretch away from that. Yeah, this whole process took me like about a day, and when you finally make your way to the lace closure, sew that last track right up next to it so it's hugging all of the edges and there's no visible cap there. You can almost sew this straight into the fabric of the lace closure and not even the cap, but this is going to be the last piece of hair we have to sew on, and we're done! As you can see, flipping it inside out, the cap is not nearly as bunched up as before since we had it stretched on the bigger head. And you'll also notice you see less of the thread this time since I didn't pierce the needle as far into the cap this time, and so it keeps that stretch. The last thing you have to do is cut off the cap underneath the lace, making sure not to cut any threads. This is so that the lace is able to do its job of being transparent on your head. And you can also cut that extra lace in the front off too. Trying it on, I was really proud of how much work I put into it, but I didn't love how hard the hairline still felt. I guess it's since it was human, I expected it to look more natural, and the curls were looking really frizzy, but of course, these are all things that we can change, and we will change in the next video. What you see me wearing right now was after I've done some styling and customizing to it. So if you want to see how I went from that to this, then just be sure to subscribe to my channel so you can be notified when I put up part 2. The hard, tedious part of the process is definitely over though. From here, it's kind of just smooth sailing. My final thoughts is I love the way it looks and I love the way it feels. I never am able to comb through the hair with my fingers if it's a synthetic wig. I'm so shocked at how soft this is. Am I going to replace all of my wigs with human hair? Probably not anytime soon. I like how synthetic wigs can take up a lot of teasing and styling and product. Probably not gonna attempt that with this hair because it's just too beautiful and luxurious. I just wanna cherish it forever, and it smells so good. I shampooed it with like nice bougie shampoo. Usually my wigs smell like Hairspray and Tears, but this one actually smells like so beautiful. Thanks again to Beauty Forever for sponsoring this video and sending me this hair to style on camera for you guys. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and comment down below what you want to see next, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!